as in like a master's thesis. That is not what we are doing today. So, I mean, I absolutely understand, right? That is a big task in and of itself. So, let me just start with, we are talking specifically about thesis statements, right? That one beautiful, succinct sentence that perfectly ties up, articulates, forecasts, whatever, verb you want to use there, right? Your argument. And then that can be used then, right, it can be your thesis statement for your thesis, right, for your dissertation, for an assignment, right, in your coursework, whatever that is going to be. But here is how I am defining a thesis statement, right? It is a claim, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So also keep in mind that I am coming from a humanities background. All of my degrees, including the PhD, are in English. Right? And so we have encountered that some of the professors here on campus have a different idea of what they want, right, in this thesis statement. So whatever I say, obviously your professor trumps, right, whatever I'm about to tell you. So always ask them what they are looking for, right, because they're the ones grading it. I'm not grading it, right, so always ask them what they would like to look for. And so, for example, I know that there are some in the fish school that actually want you to do more of a summary of what your paper's contents are, so it's not actually a claim or an argument, it's more of an actual outline of what your points are going to be. So keep that in mind. But bottom line, right, I think this is your attempt to persuade your reader, right, that you have an argument, right, you have a point, you have a perspective, and that it is interesting and logical, right? All of these are important points that you as a writer should be able to convey. So here's what the difference is. I see these all the time. Most of what I see in draft form, right, from students who come into my office, right, my own students, or to the Writing Center, tends to fall on the left side of the screen, which is you have a statement that is actually your topic. Right? What you are telling me is something that is huge, right? It's a big, broad subject, right? And while that is a great place to start, that is never going to be your thesis statement, because the thesis statement, as you'll see, right, I've tried to compare these two things. Your topic is this big set of information. It does concern a specific topic, right, or a thing, or an argument, or a disagreement, a discussion, a Bible verse, a chapter, right, a theme, something along those lines. But it is broad, and it tends to indicate more of the general, right, research that is available there. Your thesis statement will always be much more specific. If you think about it, almost like a V, right? The widest part of this, visually speaking, right, is at the top. And so that is where you start, right? That's your topic. And then with each part of this, your research process, you should get more and more narrow, almost like a funnel, right? So then your thesis statement is this little piece at the bottom that is your specific piece of it, right? It's your argument where you've taken this very, very big thing and figured out specifically what area of this, what piece of the research, what part of the conversation do you want to be a part of. So again, right, that is something very specific. It is narrow, and again, it should be an argument. For those of you who have actually seen, right, the modules that are available through the QEP, what?
Dr. Wilder entered the room as online room as Dr. Who. So
nice. But if you guys have never seen the 5 modules that our QEP has created, these are available to you inside any Blackboard course under Research and Writing Resources in that left menu. And one of the things then that they keep in mind is that your central claim, right, your thesis should be narrowed, well-written, and debatable. And debatable is the important thing, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So you'll notice those modules follow a process, and this is the process that I ask my own students to follow, because too often, and I'm sure Dr. Wilder encounters this as well, right, too often we get the students who have no idea what they want to talk about, or we get the students who already know what they want to talk about, but they haven't even done any research yet, right? So there's the two sort of extremes here. So I encourage you first find a topic. Either your professor has given it to you, right, in the prompt or in the assignment instructions, or it is something that you are being led, right, you're able to just find it, right? So if you are doing dissertation work, then for the most part, right, you are finding your own topic. But this is the way you need to be doing this, right? So every topic that you are going to come up with, I hate to break it to you, right? But other people have been talking about this particular topic. Most of the time, there is nothing that you are going to be able to do in biblical studies or Christian education or family ministry, whatever those branches are, that, right, there is nothing new under the sun. I believe Ernest Hemingway came up with that particular phrase. But the good news is, though, is that means that there is already research that exists on these particular topics. So what is the conversation about this topic? Does everyone agree? Do they not agree? How do they line up? Right, in terms of, right, who believes what, right? There's usually some sort of a continuum, right, as to where they fall in terms of biblical interpretation or application, theory, fill in the blank. And then you find a way to enter that conversation. What part of a conversation, right? You would never just be able to walk up to somebody, right, mid-sentence and just sort of interrupt that, right? You have to actually spend the time kind of figuring out who the major players are, terminology that they're using, how all of this is working out. And then, what are ways to narrow this into a research question? Here are some of the ways that we use, right, to kind of get you guys to talk through it. The first one is just the basic, right, ask yourself as if you were being interviewed on this particular topic, right? Tell me who is involved in this particular topic. What is that topic? You might have to define your terms. When? Because again, you're probably not going to be able to cover, right, the entire 2,000 years, right, from the time of Christ until now, right? You're going to be narrowing in on usually a particular time period. Where? I sometimes get students that want to talk to all of the believers on the face of the planet. No, right? Way too big, way too big. So again, right, if you are talking about particular believers, yes, exactly. The Bible is the only one that can do all the things. Other than that, right, we have to be more specific. We have to break this down. And again, right, the why and the how. So, for example, our English 3 students, we are working on their advanced argument skills, right? We give them very general topics that they can pick from. But again, they are big topics, so then they can find out what is interesting to them inside those topics. 3 Old Testament choices. Right, one is human sexuality, based on the Genesis creation story. One is the value of human life, also based on the Genesis creation story. One is the importance of personal integrity from Psalm 15. Right, so those are the 3 Old Testament. The 3 New Testaments are women in ministry from 2 Timothy, racial reconciliation from Ephesians 2, and pluralism from, and we let them pick one of the sermons in Acts. Obviously, right, Peter at Pentecost and Paul at Mars Hill are the 2 that are the most popular there. Now, hopefully you can already see, right, those are giant topics, right? There is no way you would be able to argue all of the things of human sexuality. So, using one of these then, we have our students break that down. So, you guys, right, we'll have this be participatory. So, human sexuality, what are some of the smaller topics that we can find within that bigger topic?
Mass being a smaller vessel. Is that, I don't know.
Say it again.
Smaller vessel, weaker vessel.
Aha! Okay, absolutely. Now, what do you mean by that?
I don't know what I mean by that. I just know it's there. I'm afraid because you're a strong female.
Uh-oh. Well, and that's also something to consider, right? Is one thing that comes up a lot is that if you want to talk about women and you are a man, right, then that is, right, one of those areas where you have to be rhetorically aware of what it is that, right, there's some sensitivities, right, to be aware of. Absolutely. Okay, so now when you mean weaker vessel, do you mean the creation order, or do you mean the word that is used to describe the female?
I, to be quite honest, I don't know what.
Okay. No, but I love it. Okay. It was. No, you win major points for being the first to volunteer. But all right, so obviously, right, that's one particular aspect, right? So that's marriage, and then even with that, right, if we were going to be sort of clustering this, if human sexuality is the big topic in the middle here, one of these avenues then that's a smaller one that goes off of that has to be marriage, and then within that, then, right, roles, creation order, right, because Paul references back to this, right, in his New Testament letters quite a bit, where he talks about, right, Adam is created first. So then, right, even within marriage, then we can break that down into much smaller pieces. Okay, what else? What else besides marriage is potentially in human sexuality?
What about complementarianism versus egalitarianism?
Okay, now you know I'm the English professor, so I'm going to make you define your terms.
Complementarianism says that women and men are equal, but they have different roles that God has given us. And egalitarianism simply says that women and men are equal in the exact same sense.
Absolutely. Now, even within that, right, those are giant terms and, dare I say it, loaded terms, right? And I used to think all of my teaching before I came here was at a state school. I taught at Texas A&M and I taught at Winthrop University in South Carolina. And so when I got here, I assumed that, right, we were all on fire for Jesus, right, and that right, we would all turn in assignments on time, right, and perfectly done, right, because we do all things for the glory of God, right, and that because this was a Baptist seminary that we all agreed with one another about all doctrinal things. It took me, yes, totally cute. Yeah, it took me about a day and a half to figure out that was incredibly naive of me, right? And that is not the way that works. So absolutely, right? But I've noticed some of my college students, so hopefully if you guys are at the graduate level, you've already started to figure out you can never use a term assuming that everyone is going to agree with you about that definition of the term, or even that you are right in how you're using that term, or how you're applying it, or how the verse should be read in this particular way. So absolutely, but even within those theories, right, those are big, giant theories that have a lot of people that are very passionate about those sides of things, and then you'd have to break that down even further. Absolutely. What else? No one said any of the really particularly provocative ones yet. What else is in human sexuality?
Homosexuality?
Absolutely. Homosexuality. Transgender community, right, falls within this larger category. Polyamorous relationships, right, fall under this particular category. I firmly think that's the next big fight for us as a church, right, is the polyamorous relationship. Because then, right, if we've already agreed that marriage can be with any two people, right, then we're sort of the next fighting ground. Why two, right? Two seems like an arbitrary number two. We're already starting to see this, right, churches engaging in these kinds of debates. So, absolutely. So notice though that each one of those smaller topics takes you in a completely different area, right? And then within that, how we can then narrow that down even more. So within marriage, do I want to talk about, right, genders? Do I want to talk about roles? Do I want to talk about divorce, right? And then what then does that mean? And then again, you can do any one of these. I actually kind of like the free writing method. I make my students practice with this a little bit, where you sit down and either write by hand, if that's your preferred method, or you type if you have terrible handwriting, or if that's more comfortable for you, and try to write continuously without stopping for a certain amount of time, either 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then that way, then, right, you just start typing or writing on your particular topic, kind of narrowing it down for yourself, and usually you'll have a moment, right, where you will then be, okay, this is what's interesting to me. I had no idea I was kind of thinking this in my brain. Let's move forward from there. So then, for example, so one of my students then that was working with one of those topics decided then marriage, right, from that Genesis creation story was where he wanted to go with this, and then narrowing that down even further, wanted to talk about divorce. And then narrowing that down even further, wanted to write his research paper for English 3 on, can pastors who are divorced stay in their jobs, right? Can they still be in the pulpit, right? If we look at, right, the sort of the covenant of marriage, right, as it is described. So then now we've got something, right, that is a topic, right, it is narrowed. And so then his research question, right, that's where we're moving, is from the topic into a question. So then, right, that's his question. What do we do then, right, with all of these pastors who are divorced? Because then, guess what? Once you have that research question, now you research. I know that a lot of you, right, and this happens to me as well, have already an idea of what my argument or what my position is going to be, but I always tell myself, right, and I tell my students, try to hold off on that as much as possible until you've done at least some preliminary research. Right? Because then it's too easy to find the sources that agree with you, right? And to really then build up support for that in a way that is not totally, right, accurate and a reflection of what is actually happening in that particular academic conversation. because you're going to have to be able to anticipate counter objections, right? And counter arguments. You have to understand not everyone is going to agree with you. So your research then should be, at least initially, finding out again, right, where's the conversation? What are people talking about? How are people agreeing and disagreeing here? So then, right, once you have that research question, you can use your specific search terms from that question then to enter it into David, right? So marriage, pastors, divorce, right? Any of those major search terms, because as you guys know, if I just put in marriage into a search term, that's a lot of hits, right? And then you're wasting, right, valuable time searching through things that are not going to potentially be useful to you. So, bottom line, you guys already know this, but you should already know from your professors what types of sources are they going to let you use, right? I control some of my students' sources. They must be scholarly, right? But then it's a variety of books and articles and things like that. And then there's some sources that they can control themselves. But some of the professors here, I guarantee you, if you haven't encountered it yet, you will, that don't want any popular sources at all. Everything must be scholarly in nature. So always ask, right? So if Dr. Wilder wants you to do it a certain way, you should know what that certain way is, and you should then work on that. Do what? There are actually. I'm only like third meanest in the college, despite what you may have heard. I know, yeah. I'm the queen of mean, but there's also not very many females, so it's easy to have that title. So again, right, also determine the number. If you're doing a master's thesis or a dissertation, obviously, right, number equals a lot, right? I think I had maybe 132, something in that realm, right, for the dissertation. That's a rough number. But again, if it's for your smaller assignments, right, then it's probably in the realm of 10, 20, something along those lines. And then finally, right, I know this is not the most popular thing you were going to ever hear me say, but you should have a strategy for critically reading and annotating these sources. When you're first looking to see if the source is going to be appropriate for you, skim it, right? Read the introduction, read the conclusion, right? Make sure then that this is something that's useful to you. But once you know it is useful, read it, annotate it. Annotating does not mean highlighting. I tell my students, right, that any animal with opposable thumbs, right, including chimpanzees in the zoo, right, I can highlight, right? They can pick up something and highlight things. That's not getting you to that deeper level of understanding with your sources. And you, in order to be able to integrate your sources into your paper, have on a deeper level. So I say in annotating, that's when you are putting it in your own words off to the side, right? You're starting to then figure out how these things work together, how your sources talk to one another. And then, only then, once you have done this, then you go to the thesis stage. So, because otherwise, right, how are you going to make a claim if you have no idea what the conversation is about this particular topic? Now that you have at least a good sense or a preliminary sense of what this looks like, now you can potentially answer your research question. So to go back to my students, right, he's looking at this, and it was a little bit more volatile of a topic than he anticipated, right? So pastors, right, who are divorced, should they step down? People have some pretty strong opinions about this. And so he was looking at all of this. He was working, his research mentor in that class was Dr. Lino, which I thought was perfect, right, for an ethical kind of a topic like this. So then his thesis, right, his statement, his claim should be his answer to the question. And he ultimately, right, decided, no, pastors who are divorced should not be pastors. Based on the Bible, right, based on he pulled some verses, and then he had some other sources as well in order to integrate that source. In order to support that position. So if your thesis should answer your own research question, you have to figure out where you stand, right? You also need to figure out what you want your readers to know. And then finally, I added this question in here because, again, sometimes your professors are going to want you to give us the information in different ways. So again, if they want more of a summary of what the research is, then you need to do that kind of a thesis statement. If you are informing readers, if there's not a lot of research on this area, so you're just telling them what is available in terms of, right, the research that's been done, then that's the kind of thesis then that you need to give us. Most of the time, however, though, it should most likely be, right, what your argument is, your specific claim that is, again, right, well-written, narrowed, and debatable. Now, there are ways then, what did you notice, right? If I tell you that my student's thesis is, right, pastors who are divorced should not, right, continue in the ministry. Is that narrowed enough? I'm seeing some yeses and some nos. What do you think?
I would put the qualification in there, pastoral leadership. Should not continue in pastoral leadership.
What does that mean?
That means that they can no longer preach from the pulpit in the position of authority Sunday after Sunday after Sunday.
So that means they can guest lecture?
Say again?
That means they can guest lecture? They can guest pastor?
Guest lecture, yes.
Aha.
With authority, no.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Mr. Burgess. Oh, okay, so sorry. I keep forgetting our online people can't hear you guys, right? They can only hear me. So sorry. We had a question then that said, right, they cannot continue in pastoral leadership. So then my follow-up question to him was, does that mean they can, be visiting pastors? Because then it gets tricky, right? What do I mean by even some of the terms then that I've given you in that thesis statement? Also notice, right, if I just say pastor, does that mean senior pastor? Does that mean, right, maybe associate pastor? Does that mean a particular, right, in charge of a particular area of the church? So there are ways that we could potentially narrow this down. Or even if I leave my thesis statement as is, you would have to be prepared to define those terms, most likely in the introduction, right, where you're giving us the context, you're setting up for us what you're going to be discussing. And also then that means potentially I'd have to address then, right, divorce. And then potentially then I also have to then address, right, did the pastor want that particular divorce or did the partner want that particular divorce? Or do I just mean divorce across the board? And then, right, then I don't necessarily have to talk about, right, whether or not the he said, she said kind of thing. But so think, right, that's what I mean by you have to be thinking about what all of those mean. I have to be able to define my terms and tell you exactly what it is that I want to talk about. Okay, and I know wow, 30 minutes goes by really, really quickly. So then let me begin to wrap up, and then I want to make sure you guys have a chance to ask questions if you have them. Bottom line is this. A lot of times what I get then is either, right, something that is not going to be provable, right, or again, I get something that is way too broad, or often I get something that is a summary. If we have biblical study students in the college, a lot of times I get what is basically a summary of what the Bible verses tell me, right? Psalm 15 is about integrity. Yes, good. Woo! Good job, right? But, so then that's when I give them this particular equation. And so again, right, if Genesis talks about human sexuality, again, fantastic, but where do we go from there? Or I get a lot of, Paul says women cannot be pastors. Yes, he does. Good job. But again, right, where do we go from that? What part of the argument are we engaging with here? So if X is your topic, right, X times Y, and literally Y means why. Why do you want to work on this particular topic? Why is this topic important? So you're potentially thinking about the answer to the so what question. So, right, if you've never had a grad professor actually ask you this, then you probably will before your career is over here at Swibbits. But the answer to the so what is, again, why you're even doing this project in the first place. Yes, probably because you have to, because it's a requirement, but hopefully, again, there's a reason behind it. There's usually three major reasons why we engage with particular topics, and then we want to write our own arguments. It's either A, to correct what we think is a mindset, right? We think this way, that's problematic, we want to correct that way of thinking. Another reason is to correct actions, right? We are doing something that we shouldn't be doing, or we are not doing something that we should be doing, right? And then finally, sort of the C is a combination of these two, right? Where we need to correct the thinking first, and then that'll manifest itself in action, right? So for those of you that are writing sort of a practical application kind of a paper. So again, you have to be able to tell me the why. Because again, your thesis statement should again indicate your claim. It should be then indicating to me why this is important. Why should I be reading this? Right? Why are you spending all of this time and energy and money, right, on your studies? I know you think that this is important, but just figure out a way to articulate that to me. And then the final part, right, equals Z. What do you hope to accomplish with it? Right? So if I'm talking about topic X, because of reason Y, I hope to accomplish Z. Right? And so again, right, am I trying to speak to people in my home church, right, to a particular denomination, to pastors who are doing something, support staff that are doing something, believers, right, that are doing something wrong or need to be doing this in a better way. Whatever it is, then your thesis statement then should indicate these kinds of things. So then again, we're kind of getting away from the, Paul built a contextual bridge, right, in his sermon on Mars Hill. Great, wonderful, but again, that doesn't indicate to me where you want to go with that or why that's important to you. Are you using that as your model for evangelism and you think, right, this is the way Paul set this up, so then that's the way we should be going out into our neighborhoods? Is that where you want to go with this? Do you think then that this is a particular context, right, and then we need to determine what our own context is in order to apply it? Where are we going with these particular things? And so again, right, define the problem, right, that's your what. Determine the purpose, that's your why. Again, are you informing, persuading, right, what are you doing? Because then that will often then give you these clues as to where you go from here. And then finally, right, establish the methodology, because then once you have the what and the why, then that sets up for you, right, for those of you doing a thesis or a dissertation, you have a methodology chapter, and you should then be able to tell us how you're going to accomplish all of this wonderful stuff that you have just told us that you're going to do. Right, so once you even have your topic, you've got your research question, you can answer that research question, how are you going to prove it? Right, if you have a particular audience, what sources are they going to believe, right? What's going to be credible? What do you need to be gathering? How do you need to be proving it to them? And so again, right, all of that, right, this is why thesis statements are so important. That one sentence should accurately forecast and hint at all of this wonderful stuff that's going on right here. And now you know why Dr. Wilder makes you go to these things, right? Because it's a difficult process. It takes practice. I don't have special thesis DNA, right? It's not the way this works. I just have more practice. I do this all day, every day, right? That's the only reason I'm better at this. You too, right, can do this, but it does take a little bit of effort, right, and time to be able to work through this particular process. And that's the fun and the not so fun part. Right? Usually I've never met any students who couldn't do this. I've met lots of students who wouldn't, and there's a big difference there. Right? And so will you guys, right, give yourselves enough time, right? Will you devote enough energy, right, and space to the way that this needs to be done? I know, right? That's like doom and gloom sort of a thing. But again, right, if you do that and you're interested in the project, which hopefully all of you are, then it won't really feel like work. Right? That's how I knew that this was what I wanted to do for a living. The idea of writing a dissertation in this particular area, right, rhetoric and composition, was exciting to me. And then the research didn't feel like, oh my goodness, I have to do this. I wanted to be reading in this area. I wanted to be working in this area. And so that's where hopefully, right, you'll already have the why and the what you hope to accomplish. Which then, right, leads us to then where we're going to pick up next time, right? So then hopefully you figure out a way to do this. Now, this is for my college students. If you're not a college student, I expect much, much better, right, from what this is. But you'll notice it says a draft. So if you need a place to start, almost like a placeholder, because some of my students have a hard time coming up with their thesis until they've actually written the paper, which is smaller paper, right, than some of you are doing. So until they figure out where they're going to end up, then they don't know where they needed to have started. So if that is your possibility, right, if that is you, then could just sort of draft something on this really early preliminary stage. I believe this because of this, right? We don't do whatever this is, but we should because this is the better option. The problem is this, and the way to solve it is this. Again, you'll notice this is like Dr. Wilder may be the only other person in this room that remembers Mad Libs. Anybody remember Mad Libs? Right, where you could actually write fill in the blanks. So this is your Mad Libs version of a thesis statement here. Again, it should get better. It should evolve, right, as you write your paper, but this is a way of thinking about it. So if you get stuck, try to just come up with a really early draft of this that gets your thoughts out on paper.